Welcome to Hope from History, where the ancestors teach yes you can, because yes we did. Addie Banks presents early Black entrepreneurs who have a history and business story to share. Some Black American entrepreneur stories are worthy of the silver screen. Stephanie St. Clair's was screened, and she was played by Cicely Tyson. The early 20th century brought Black immigrants from the West Indies to realize their dreams. Many settled in New York's Harlem and Brooklyn neighborhoods, and Stephanie St. Clair was one of them. Here is her coming to America story. Stephanie St. Clair was of French and African descent, born in Martinique. She never knew her father, but her mother, Feliciane, worked hard to send her to school. But when Stephanie turned 15, her mother became very ill, and she had to leave school and found employment as a maid with a rich family. There, she was repeatedly raped by the son. She endured this abuse to earn enough money to flee Martinique and head to France after her mother died in 1912. Even though she could read and write, a rare quality for a Black woman at the time, and she spoke excellent French, she could not find decent employment there. Stephanie immigrated to the United States at around age 23. She used the long voyage and the subsequent quarantine to learn English. New York City at the turn of the century was a bustling town with immigrants. Dock noise, poverty, and hope met her. She saw everybody grabbing after the American dream, working in factories to build the Industrial Revolution American style. New York City boomed, and syndicate organizations vied for positions to make fast money with gambling, liquor, prostitution. The competition was fierce and sometimes fatal. This was the world that greeted pretty, innocent, and alone Stephanie St. Clair, stepping off the boat in 1913. Straight off the boat, broken English, no money or family, just heart, plenty of heart. As a status boost, in America, she told people that she was born in European France because she was able to speak flawless French, as opposed to the less refined French spoken by Caribbeans. Whenever people questioned her national origin, she would always respond in French. Soon after Stephanie arrived in Harlem, she fell in love with a small-time crook named Duke. Being a beautiful and exotic young woman, Duke thought Stephanie would draw in money as a prostitute. But she won't have none of that. The story goes that she planted a fork in his eye and promptly left New York on a bus. The following night, the bus was stopped by the Ku Klux Klan. Several Black passengers were hanged or burnt alive in front of her, and she was repeatedly raped. Following this incident, she returned to New York. Yes, she was afraid, but felt safer after learning that Duke had been shot in a gang fight. Back in New York, Stephanie found work to support herself, but her ambition burned to be rich. After getting oriented in her new homeland, she learned how to operate and who to befriend. She learned how big money was made. All around her, she saw people achieving, Black people, or at least living better than at home. St. Clair decided to go into business and partnered with her new boyfriend, Ed. After a few months, she had made $30,000 and told Ed she wanted to leave him and start an independent business. Ed tried to strangle her, and she pushed him away with such force that he cracked his head against a table and died. On April 12, 1917, she invested $10,000 of her own money in the clandestine lottery game in Harlem. Her success running one of the leading numbers games in the city earned her queen status. In Manhattan, she was known as Queenie. In Harlem, Madam Queen or Madam St. Clair. And everywhere, she was the queen of the policy rackets. Numbers was an illegal betting game that had taken Harlem by storm. Each day, people from all walks of life placed bets on what numbers would fall on the next day's lottery draw. Most lost their pennies and nickels but played again the next day. That little change added up for Madame St. Clair to become very rich. She worked her business and hired all the protection needed, including bribing police. In addition to being one of the only women involved in the business, St. Clair saw herself as a social force in the community, providing jobs for people to support families. St. Clair expanded her criminal empire to include policy banking that incorporated investing, gambling, and playing the lottery. At that time, white banks did not serve black investors. Therefore, policy banking, while illegal, served a need in the black community. Due to shrewd business practices, St. Clair lived a lavish lifestyle, making over $20,000 a year in the 1920s. In spite of her beginnings, St. Clair developed an eloquent sense of fashion and was well known throughout Harlem. She always dressed to the nines and looked equal parts exquisite and dangerous. If pushed, she did not hesitate to unleash a tirade of profanity in several languages or threats that got their attention. Madame St. Clair feared none in her outward behavior and was passionate about what she believed in. She said, "I am sane and smart and fearless." Mamie Johnson, the wife of St. Clair's crime lieutenant Bumpy Johnson, told how, when adequately riled, Stephanie would slip off her high heels and stand toe-to-toe with her antagonist, preparing to fight them in her stocking feet. Yes, she took off her heels and earrings. Before the Depression, in the 1920s, New York City was a wide-awake gay town where a renaissance was happening in Harlem. The Cotton Club was segregated, but other venues found blacks swinging to a lively nightlife. Harlem hosted blacks of all income levels, and there was a spirit of prosperity in the air. It was in this atmosphere that St. Clair reigned. By the 1930s, St. Clair had a personal fortune of around $500,000 cash, and she owned several apartment buildings. She earned an estimated $200,000 a year and employed 40 to 50 numbers runners, 10 comptrollers, and several bodyguards. She lived at the exclusive 409 Edgecombe building on Sugar Hill, alongside some of Harlem's most influential black intellectuals, like W.E.B. Du Bois and NAACP leader Walter White. Yes, they knew her and knew what she did to earn a living, because St. Clair was not ashamed of her work. Her larger-than-life personality and extravagant lifestyle, clothes and jewelry, made her noticeable. In fact, St. Clair's flamboyant presentation and reputation as a dangerous numbers banker captured the imagination of all New Yorkers. St. Clair was a self-styled social activist who used media to express anger when outraged by perceived slights or injustice to Black Americans. She continuously turned to the media to express her views. She ran ads in the local newspapers, educating the Harlem community about their legal rights, advocating voter registration, and calling out police brutality. At the turn of the 20th century, Harlem was controlled by the Sicilian Mafia and other Italian crime families. The policy racket was exclusively male. Territories were generally respected. With more diverse immigrant populations, ethnic gaming bosses emerged, primarily Latina and blacks who arrived from the South to escape Jim Crow. In 1920, the United States passed prohibition, making it a criminal offense to produce, import, transport, or sell alcoholic beverages. This severely cut into the Jewish and Italian syndicates' profit line. To counter losses, they decided to move into Harlem to take over policy gaming. Author Dutch Schultz, Flegenheimer, a Jewish mobster from the Bronx, earned the reputation of being one of New York's and the nation's most ruthless bootleggers. In 1935, Federal Bureau Investigations FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called him public enemy number one due to his violent tactics to force blacks and Latino number bankers out of business. He intimidated them and gave them one of two options. They could merge business with him or pay to stay by sharing a portion of their profits. If they declined, Schultz threatened, beat, or killed, and over 40 people were killed in gangland-related violence. But mob boss Dutch Schultz hit up against the racket queen, and St. Clair, she won't hear in this. She took out a newspaper ad to tell the community that she was not backing down and encouraged them not to use the services of Schultz to place their bets, but to continue placing bets with black kings and queens. She said in her ad, "I'm not afraid of Dutch Schultz or any other living man. He'll never touch me." This did not go well. Schultz retaliated and upped the harassment of St. Clair and her people. St. Clair marched into stores where Schultz's betting operations occurred and broke showcases and threatened workers. She tipped off the police about his business location, and this resulted in the police raiding his house, arresting more than a dozen employees and seizing millions of dollars. St. Clair never submitted to Dutch Schultz. Now it was on. Despite St. Clair's calling police to complain about harassment by Schultz's men, they did nothing. She turned to the newspapers, but without political influence at City Hall, her concerns were ignored. On December 30th, 1929, New York Police Department officers arrested St. Clair at 117 West 141st Street, where an alleged numbers bank operated, and she was reportedly in possession of number slips. On January 1st, St. Clair placed a paid editorial in the NYAN announcing her arrest, quote, "I have been arrested and framed by 3 of the bravest and the noblest cowards who wear civilian clothes," end quote. During her March 1930 trial, St. Clair represented herself. She admitted to being a numbers banker, but claimed that she, quote, was marked for a jail term because of her fight for courtesy and freedom from annoyance in contacting the police, end quote. In her nearly 3-hour court testimony, St. Clair noted that, quote, because of her desire to retire after she accumulated her fortune, and because of jealousy of other policemen who were not in on the gravy train, her apartment was raided, $400 in cash taken, end quote, and she was arrested. Despite St. Clair's revealing testimony, an unconvinced jury and judge convicted and sentenced her to 8 months and 20 days in the workhouse on New York City's Welfare Island. It won't over. Mess with the wrong one. When St. Clair was released, she took out several ads in Harlem newspapers, naming names and accusing senior police officers of various forms of corruption. St. Clair appeared before the Samuel Seabury Commission in December 1930. The commission investigated corruption in the Bronx and Manhattan courts and in the NYPD. Appearing before the commission, St. Clair, lavishly dressed in her mink coat and a chic hat, readily testified about her business relationships with police. According to St. Clair, she sent payments of $100 and $500 to a lieutenant of the 6th Division and paid cops a total of $6,000 to avoid arrest. Her testimony resulted in the suspension of 13 police officers. On October 23, 1935, St. Clair's public battle with Dutch Schultz ended when he was shot at the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey. As Schultz lay dying in a New Jersey hospital, he allegedly received a telegram from the Queen of Numbers, which read, "As ye sow, so shall you reap." He died 3 days later on October 26. By the 1940s, St. Clair had turned the business over to Bumpy Johnson, her former chief enforcer, who was crowned reigning Black Numbers King in Harlem. Retired but not through with drama in her life. St. Clair was wealthy thanks to smart investments, and she decided to get married. In July 1936, she married Sufi Abdul Hamid, a self-appointed civil rights advocate who wore a gold-lined cape and purple turban. Hamid was the leader of an Islamic Buddhist cult, and by some accounts somewhat of a con man. He claimed, among other things, to be a descendant of Egyptian pharaohs. He was also a trained airplane pilot. Hamid was notorious for being the Black Hitler of Harlem. He stood outside of Jewish stores giving anti-Semitic speeches. Well, all was not well at home. The union was a bumpy one from the first. Both were known for their passion and potential for physical violence. Hamid was arrested and jailed for assaulting a fellow social activist, cutting him in the face. But it really got hot when on January 19, 1938, St. Clair shot Hamid at an office building on 125th Street after accusing him of having an affair with a young conjure woman from Jamaica. This conjure woman was none other than the famed Harlem fortune teller, Dorothy Fufu Futam Matthews, whom Hamid married in 1938. In her own defense, St. Clair claimed that the gun went off during a struggle. She informed police that she went to confront Hamid because he had been treating her cruelly and because of his alleged affair with Matthews. In several newspaper interviews, Hamid admitted that he was not surprised by her actions. Several weeks prior to the shooting, St. Clair had threatened his life after he informed her that he wanted no more to do with her. She testified that he abused her, that on one occasion he threatened to throw her through a window, and at another time he hit her so hard it broke her earrings. The encounter found Hamid mostly unharmed. A bullet singed his mustache and nicked his teeth, and another bullet grazed his arm. In the courtroom, testimonies would vary regarding who did the shooting and why. St. Clair insisted that if she had wanted Hamid dead, he would be dead. During the trial, St. Clair's lawyer was able to get Hamid to admit that his name was Eugene Brown, and that he was from Philadelphia. The all-white jury convened for 3 hours, and when it emerged, they found Stephanie St. Clair guilty of possession of a deadly weapon and first-degree assault. She was sentenced to 2 to 10 years at the State Prison for Women in Bedford Hills, New York. The judge made a statement to the court, quote, "This woman has been living by her wits all her life. She has a bad temper and must learn that she can't go around shooting at other people," end quote. St. Clair served 3 years of the sentence. Once released from prison, she lived a relatively quiet life and became more involved in working for civil and economic rights for Black Americans. In 1960, St. Clair was interviewed for an article in the New York Post by journalist Ted Poston. She talked about being the only Negro banker to fight off Schultz and criticized Black bankers for being intimidated by white racketeers. She quotes, "I fought Schultz from 1931 to 1935, and it cost me a total of 820 days in jail and $750,000, end quote. St. Clair repeated that she never was afraid of Dutch Schultz or any other living man, and admitted saying that he would never touch her, or she would have killed the rat. She felt that it was a racial insult for Schultz to swindle the colored people, that white infiltration of Harlem's Numbers Racket was an extension of Jim Crow segregation and threatened Black bankers' businesses. Poston informed readers that St. Clair had successfully transitioned from underworld figure to a legitimate, prosperous businesswoman. Mamie Johnson, then widow of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, claimed St. Clair relocated to a Long Island mansion, never again getting into the numbers business. St. Clair died quietly and still wealthy in 1969, at the age of 82. For a newspaper celebrity most of her life, St. Clair's death was not mentioned in any newspaper of the era.